Hello and welcome to the first day of the quadratic formula 10.6. Today what we're going to do is we're going to figure out a method. We're going to learn a method that works for solving all types of quadratic equations. And so it's a complicated formula because it works for all of them. It's kind of like a catch-all. So you kind of only want to use this formula when you don't have another method, or the other methods aren't going to work. So here's the formula right here. Okay, a cannot be 0, and b squared minus 4ac, this part on the inside, it has to be greater than or equal to 0. If it's negative, you're going to have no solution. But we'll talk about that more so in 10.7. So x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac, all divided by 2a. I'm going to show you guys how to put in the numbers and how to evaluate this. So we've seen a, b, and c before, and it has to be equal to 0. So let's just jump right into this. Here's the derivation for this formula. It's basically completing the square on a general quadratic equation. So instead of having numbers, you use a, b, and c. And if you are interested in learning this or figuring out why this works the way it does, you can see me in class, and I'd be happy to show you. So you don't need to put this in your notes, unless you want to. Okay, so here we go. We're going to give this a try. This is just basically all algebra. So I'm going to subtract the negative 8 from both sides. So that's equal to 0. And then I'm going to identify a, b, and c. A equals 3, b equals 5, c equals negative 8. Make sure you have your signs correct. So negative b plus or minus, and it's going to take a little bit of time to remember this formula, but with enough practice, hopefully you get it. Negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c, all divided by 2a. Okay, so that's the start. So take a look at those numbers, and then what we're going to do is just make sure where all those numbers are coming from, and then we're going to start solving this or evaluating this. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to do 5 squared is 25. That number's always going to be positive. Always positive, because you're squaring it. Okay, so that number's negative. It's going to throw everything off. All right, and then I'm going to do negative 4 times 3 times negative 8. That's positive 96. All divided by 6. 25 plus 96. Basically doing some PEMDAS here. Negative 5 plus or minus the square root of 121. All divided by 6. And then I have negative 5. The square root of 121 is positive and negative 11. So plus 11 divided by 6, and then minus 11 divided by 6. So here are your two solutions. So we have 6 divided by 6 is 1, and negative 16 divided by 6 is negative 8 thirds. So 1 and 8 thirds are your answers. Okay, here's another one. And again, all these are the same type of problems. I'm going to identify a, b, and c after moving everything to the left-hand side. Okay, a is 2, b is negative 1, c is 7, negative 7. I have the answers down here, just noticed that. We'll get rid of those, I guess, for the time being. We're actually going to solve this and come up with those ourselves. Okay, negative b. Negative 1 is positive 1, plus or minus the square root of b squared. Negative 1 squared minus 4 times a times c, all divided by 2a. Okay, so this goes to 1 plus or minus the square root of 1. Negative 1 times negative 1 is 1, plus 56. Negative 4 times 2 is 8, times negative 7 is 56, all divided by 4. Okay, the square root of 57 is 7.55. So I have 1 plus 7.55 divided by 4, and then 1 minus 7.55 divided by 4, and that is where you come up with your two answers. Right there. So there you go. It's a pretty repetitive process. You can do these problems all day. I'm not going to do any more because they're basically all the same. I can do one of these problems for you guys in class, a sample question. And then there's a lot of word problems. This formula is good for word problems because basically it allows you to solve these problems without using a calculator, a graphing calculator, when the numbers are really tricky. So here they're talking about films produced from 71 to 2002, and they give us this equation where X is the number of years since 1971, and what year were 4,200 films produced. So here you just take the 4,200, plug that in for Y, and then you would subtract the 4,200 from both sides, so we have it equal 0, and then you can plug in A, B, and C into the formula, and then solve that formula there. So I'm not going to go through this, I'm just going to kind of show you guys what that would look like, and then have your two answers. So your two answers end up with approximately 12 and approximately -3, but you would not use this -3 because that falls outside of the range, because that would represent 1968, and that's outside of the range for the time period. This 12 here, we take 12 years from 1971, and we'd add 12 years to that, and we'd get 1983 for our answer. So there you go. In 1983, there was 4,200 films produced according to this formula. And then here's kind of a summary of the different methods. So we've learned factoring, we've used graphing using the calculators. We won't be doing this though. We've learned square roots. That's when b equals 0. Completing the square when a equals 1 and b is even. And now the quadratic formula, any. Use it for any. But generally we're going to try to use these other ones before we use the formula. So here are some sample problems that you can take a look at and figure out which one you'd actually use. This one here, b equals 0. Use square roots. This one here, you could factor out the GCF. Don't forget about the GCF method, okay? Some of these are really quick. X equals 0, x equals -4. So if you can use those other techniques, it's going to be much quicker than the formula. This one I would use the formula. It doesn't factor. It's ugly. It's terrible. So this is a skill that you guys are going to develop here. This one here, take a look at it. This one factors actually. Okay, so you could do factoring. This one here, b is equal to 0. So I would solve it using square roots. You could also factor that one into x minus 3 and x plus 3 if you want. That'd be a second option, but I would go with square roots there. And then this one here, I'd move the -5 over. So x squared plus 6x minus 5. Actually, this one isn't going to factor. I thought it might have. So a is equal to 1 and b is even. I would use solving using square, the completing the square here. Alright, so there you go. That is the formula, and that is how to identify which method to use. We're going to be practicing this a lot, and then we'll have a day 2 on 10.6 so you guys can practice a little more. Thank you guys for tuning in.